Hi folks, my name is Nadia Blair. I am a professional English tutor partnering with Embrace Tutoring and Educational Services to bring you this short webinar. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. If you like what you see, please feel free to get in touch. All my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. And as always, you can just visit Embrace Tutoring online to see our full offering of services. Today, we are going to be kind of doing a brief overview of the SAT grammar must-knows under the framework of how to think like a test writer. So before we get into that, just a little bit about me. This is small Nadia. I was actually reading almost at the same time that I was learning to walk. So I've been a lifelong student of English. I have been annoying my parents with literacy since a very young age and correcting all of my friends' grammar usage since early middle school. Not a huge hit in social circles, but it led me to a really fulfilling educational career at Gordon College, where I graduated with honors with a bachelor's degree in English and a minor in creative writing. So those things were just personal passions in my own life, but then I started recognizing a deeper passion for literacy education and advocacy, as well as representation of neurodiversity in teaching theory, which has brought me to be a full-time professional tutor. I specialize in SAT and ACT and really enjoy teaching those subjects. Related to that, so some things that I had the opportunity of participating in during my undergraduate years, as well as directly after, like I said, I am literacy advocacy minded. So I studied and presented dyslexia research at the New England Writing Center Association annual conference in 2018. This was a really unique opportunity to be able to meet with other professionals to kind of talk about how writing centers work at a collegiate level, and also how we are serving our students who present neurodiverse needs. Additionally, I completed 100+ hours as a peer writing tutor, specializing in working with neurodivergent students, like I've said, those with learning disorders, both documented and undocumented, and also English language learners. As I was in the English department, a little bit of an English nerd, spent a lot of time in the English department. I had the honor of working in the department as a creative writing TA. Occasionally got to teach a few lectures, and that's when I kind of realized that I very much loved one-on-one teaching. I liked the classroom setting, which eventually led me to find Embrace. Right after graduation, I received professional training in all sections of the SAT and ACT regarding reading and writing, which actually includes the science portion. Something we don't talk about a whole lot is actually the science portion of the ACT is a glorified reading test. If you want to hear more about that, shoot me an email. I'd love to chat. Finally, I am currently writing curriculum for and teaching elementary creative writing, middle school reading comprehension, and high school debate. So every area of my life is infused in reading, writing, and conversations about inclusivity. And so I'm very much enjoying my time. When I'm meeting with new clients and new students and their families, these are the most common questions that I'm asked. What is my approach and why do I tutor? I feel like the answers to these are kind of tied to one another. My approach to teaching SAT and ACT prep specifically comes at an angle that considers the fact that the SAT it's formulaic. It is teachable. It is a high point of anxiety for a lot of students. And there's a lot of miscommunications and kind of myths and mysteries about the SAT that make it out to be a much more daunting task than it actually is when focused one-on-one tutoring time is allowed for. And then the reason I tutor is because I do recognize education and the ability to learn as a super complex organism all on its own. And I've been really fascinated at what happens when people with all different ways of thinking and thought patterns come together and try to talk about something that has been presented as universal. So I greatly enjoy giving back to a community, a writing-minded community that has given so much to me in my life. So moving into today's little mini lecture, like I said, I'm just going to be covering some of the SAT grammar basics, pointing out some things, again, through the lens of thinking like a test maker. So as I mentioned a couple moments ago, there are a lot of things that we think about the SAT. For the purpose of this presentation, I will just be focusing on the SAT, though many of these principles also apply to the ACT. So there are many myths and mysteries about the SAT that often cause people to get in a little bit of a panic before preparation that I would like to address before we start. So here are some things the SAT is not. It is not a giant chapter test. Sometimes my students will look at it and say, I don't know that I have learned all of this, or I don't know if I, like, how am I supposed to remember something from 8th grade? You are not expected to remember everything that you learned from 8th grade. Fortunately, 8th grade wasn't even too long ago, and I cannot tell you what I learned. So that is not what's being expected from you on this test. Also, it is not the end all be all on intelligence. Of course, we are aiming for high scores on the SAT, as it is, we will get into discussing an aptitude test primarily. However, this test is written in a very specific way by very specific brains. So some people will find certain aspects of the test more challenging than others. That's why we take the time to break down the strategies, talk it out, and building a relationship with a tutor who is able to build a personalized plan for you. That's another aspect of my approach to tutoring specifically. Everyone's brain is different, and we're all going to process this information differently. And finally, kind of piggybacking on that, it's not impossible to prepare for. Because it's formulaic, there are strategies and there are ways to learn the test, which is comforting, as that is not something that is always offered on a chapter test. Rather, the SAT is more of a temperature check. The reason that SAT scores are considered by colleges is because they are, as the second point mentions here, a means for assessing aptitude, not measuring intelligence. So the SAT is assessing your ability to process new information and reproduce what you are being told. So essentially, we are engaging our ability, argumentation, logic, deciphering, decoding, those kinds of things. The information that you are presented with might be familiar or unfamiliar to you, but the tools that you have gained in writing classes and classes of all kinds really will contribute to how well you are able to do on this test. And then finally, like I mentioned, it's not universally difficult or easy. The most challenging part of the SAT, I would say, is the mental space you occupy when you enter the test. So if you are here, it means that you are interested in getting a little bit more in your personal preparation, which is a really great start. You're ahead of the game. I would highly recommend practicing on your own, practicing with somebody. Repetition is the key, as every test is different and you can't always predict the information. So if we're thinking about the test writers, like I said, they are individuals with specific ways of thinking. However, the SAT itself has, I guess you could kind of call it a brand in a way. There are expectations that are universals on the SAT, and we're going to cover a couple of them here. So here are some overall assumptions that will apply to every section, including the math section on the SAT, that you should keep in mind as you approach your studies. So the SAT writers are assuming that students are able to make logical conclusions based on information both plainly presented and implied. So this is triggering your ability or testing your ability to read between the lines, to assess context clues. We're going to use that word a lot today. Context clues, inferences, those kinds of things. Are you able to read beyond face value of information? Second assumption is that students understand the basic elements of a complete sentence and can identify and differentiate between its necessary pieces. So every school has a different approach to grammar in general, which is why learning what is covered on the SAT specifically, because there are major areas of grammar that are excluded, that are still important in everyday life, but are not as pertinent to the SAT. So that's why we have specific strategies for what you will be needing to learn here, just in case it's something that has not yet been covered in your classic school studies. Third, similar to the first, that students rely equally on logic and context to derive meaning, both explicit and implicit. So every reader is going to bring, previous knowledge to the test, which is oftentimes a tool and then other times can present a challenge. The third assumption here is that you are balancing logic and context in order to come up with the correct answer, or the most correct answer, I should say. And then finally, the fourth assumption here is that students have a grasp on the basic concepts of grammar well enough not only to identify when a sentence just feels wrong, but able to articulate the problem. So again, this is just a problem of mechanics and having the language to explain why you are making a change or why something is even being asked about in the first place. Okay. So more specifically, when we are talking about stylistic preferences on behalf of the SAT, here are some things you want to be looking for in the writing section specifically. One thing I want to note, I will use the terms writing and grammar section interchangeably, as the writing section on the SAT is the portion that tests grammar aptitude. So if a piece of information is short and sweet, the SAT wants you to choose that selection. If it's easy to prove, the fewer steps, the better. SAT writers also really love when an example is given. So if you have an answer option, and of course these become relevant depending on the question that's being asked, but these are kind of tenets of information being presented that you should prioritize. Providing an example, providing clarification, linking multiple concepts together, that's always a winner. And then most simply, I would say, is the answer option that reads aloud most easily and most smoothly is the correct answer. So on the flip side of that, the SAT does not like wordy explanations. If an answer takes too many steps to prove, this isn't the math section. So we want to make sure that the conclusion that you can logically jump to the quickest, essentially with the ability to prove it, of course, with the information that you've read, that's going to be your correct answer. No repetition of information. They're highly intolerant to repetition. That, of course, tests your ability to track information as you read a passage. Can you recognize, oh, I already read that? So that's what's being tested there. Introducing unnecessary new information without it being tied back to passage as a whole is definitely going to be a red flag, something you want to look for. Similarly, out of context. And here on the correct side, we want the thing that is most easily read aloud. And going off of that, if it overuses punctuation, we want to think about punctuation as kind of a written clue for a verbal error, essentially an error tip. You might need to pause here, or this is where you speed up, this is where you slow down. If a sentence is overusing punctuation, it's making it a little bit more complicated than necessary, and so therefore we are not going to use it. Okay, so today we are covering these 6 of the major grammatical concepts in the writing section. First, we will discuss subject-verb agreement, noun-pronoun agreement, parallelism, the 3 simple tenses, past simple versus past perfect, and information organization. Like I said, these are 6 of the about 11 concepts of grammar that are covered on the SAT grammar section. So this is just going to be a little bit of a taste test, couple tips for each section. So starting with subject-verb agreement. In order to have a complete sentence, you must have a subject, the who or the what the sentence is about, and a verb, which is both either the being of the subject or the action it completes. Oftentimes, students get tripped up on locating verbs and verb issues because we think of verbs always as action. Is, are, be, those are all verbs. However, they don't describe anything other than existence. So if you are looking for your verb, think, is something here just simply being told to me that it is here, or is it doing something? Those are the 2 questions you want to ask to find your verb. In any sentence, your subject and verb must agree both logically and in quantity. A singular subject requires a singular verb, whereas a plural subject requires a plural verb. Easy enough. What do those look like? Let's take a look at some examples. Example number 1, the child cries loudly. First, I want to identify my noun. Who cries loudly? Child. How many is child? Child describes one subject. So we have a singular subject, and my verb is cries. Cries how? Cries loudly. So we have child cries, and we've decided that this is in a singular case. Second example here, cats are common domestic pets. Okay, well, what's my subject? I see multiple nouns in here. I see cats and pets, but we are relating cats to being pets. So cats is our plural noun, subject noun. And then the cats aren't doing anything other than being common domestic pets. So our plural verb is are. These first 2 examples are the easiest to identify our subject-verb pairing. However, they are only one type of sentence structure that exists in general, and only one kind that you will actually encounter on the test itself. So question 3, it gets a little bit more tricky to identify both our noun and our verb. So let's take a look. The boy with the bulky headphones on his head is shockingly tall. Lots of nouns in this sentence, and there are so many prepositional phrases that separate our subject, boy, singular, from our singular verb is. So pro tip, anytime you encounter a sentence where your subject is followed by several prepositional phrases, either mentally or physically cross those out in order to identify your verb. Similarly, We have in number 4 here, Mika and Jane, who are identical twins, love to wear matching outfits. Okay, so I see several verbs and several subjects in here. However, we have what we call an appositive phrase. And a positive phrase is an extra explanation of our subject or subjects that falls between 2 commas or parentheses or double dashes. We'll actually get to punctuation in a little bit. So in this case, who are identical twins is an additional phrase that is not grammatically or content-wise needed here in order for this sentence to function. So Mika and Jane, those are both our subjects. So we know we're referring to 2 different people. So logically, we are going to need a verb that works for 2 different people. So Mika and Jane love to wear matching outfits. Here's a helpful little tip to keep in mind. Usually adding an S to the end of a verb makes it singular, and adding an S to the end of a noun makes it plural. So for example, the tiny frogs hop quickly. We're most used to seeing an S at the end of a word, and we automatically think, oh, that's plural, only if it comes at the end of a noun. So just make sure that you're keeping tabs on where the S is falling, because in our second example here, the old sign sways slowly. Sign is singular, there's only one, and so the S needs to be pasted onto the end of our verb sway in order for it to be singular. All right, and that leads us nicely into noun and pronoun agreement. So nouns are people, places, things, and ideas, I would say. Pronouns are words that take the place of nouns. Pronouns and nouns must agree. There are 4 major categories of pronouns: subject, object, demonstrative, and possessive. If those are new terms to you, I would recommend going ahead and looking those up. Pause this video, go and just do a quick dictionary search to see what classifies each pronoun in any one of these categories. Below are the 5 most common errors on the SAT or problems that will be given to you when it comes to noun and pronouns. So sometimes we will have tension between the subject and an object pronoun. So for example, this sentence could read either, him and Jane got married right after graduate school, or he and Jane got married right after graduate school. So most commonly, students would answer him here because him just sounds right. This is one of those cases in which you need to know why something is right, not just saying, well, it feels right. Because if we were to separate the pronoun him from the second subject noun in here, Jane, and we made it singular, how would it sound? It would read, him got married. And we know that's not correct because him is the object pronoun in this case, and we need a subject pronoun. So in this case, we would choose he. He and Jane got married right after graduate school. Similarly, we have singular versus plural pronoun. So we need to be looking once again at the case. The African elephant is known for its valuable ivory tusks, or the African elephant is known for their valuable ivory tusks. Well, elephant is singular, so we're only referring to one, and we have the pronoun its. Wrong possessive pronoun. A student must choose their classes before Friday. A student must choose his or her classes before Friday. So in this case, this is one of those peculiarities that belongs to the SAT where you might know someone or you yourself might use they, them pronouns to describe. In this case, we would refer to that as not as specific as we can be. So anytime that you can be specific on the SAT, when it comes to pronouns especially, that will be your correct answer in this case. So in this case, we are going to choose either his or her. So a student must choose his or her classes before Friday. Similarly, we have another way that we can have ambiguous pronouns in here. We have 2 subjects, Ben and Aaron, ran the race to support his mother. We don't really know who his is because we don't know the pronouns of these 2 individuals, but we don't know, therefore we don't know who his refers to. So if we repeat the name, it helps us know out of these 2 people, we are referring to Aaron's mother. Finally, we have demonstrative pronouns. Don't carry so many boxes at once. Put that down. Or, don't carry so many boxes at once. Put those down. So in this case, we have demonstrative pronouns show us physical relationship and distance. So this is my pen. That is my plant. These are my notes. Those are my guinea pigs. So if you think about location, proximity, and amount, once again. So in this case, we have multiple boxes, so I know I'm going to need a plural pronoun. And in this case, we're going to use those because we are referring to something that is away from the speaker, and there are multiple of them. Okay, the concept of parallelism. This is typically when my students say, well, this sentence just feels wrong. Typically, if a sentence just kind of feels wrong, it is not paralleled. So parallelism refers to the concept of creating balanced and equal sentences. Sentences must be paralleled grammatically, chronologically, and sensibly. So let's take a look at what a non-paralleled sentence might even look like. During the fall, I enjoy hiking, reading, and I like to bake. So what we see here is content-wise, that makes sense. I understand what that sentence is saying, but it doesn't read smoothly. So one way to make this read more smoothly is simply to add the ing ending on each of the verbs here. So during the fall, I enjoy hiking, reading, and baking. So in this case, you see everything has been paralleled and it reads a lot more smoothly. Let's look at another example. There is mud in the carpet, on the stairs, and it is between the cracks of the floor. So once again, we're getting interrupted with this pronoun it and the other verb is. We already know that we are referring to the mud. So we don't need to repeat a pronoun it because we already know we're still talking about mud. And in this case, we have prepositional phrases. So where is the mud? In the carpet, on the stairs, and between the cracks of the floor. So we still need this prepositional phrase of the floor because we need to know what cracks we're referring to. However, this prepositional phrase on its own is now parallel to the other locational prepositional phrases. Okay, Kira needs to improve both her time management skills and she needs to be more organized. By now, I'm sure you know what's wrong with this and how we can fix it. Here's one way. Kira needs to improve her time management and organizational skills. So we turn these concepts into adjectives. What kind of skills? Management and organizational. Okay, moving right along, we have our 3 simple tenses. This is probably a portion that you have a lot of practice with in school. There are just a couple ways that it shows up uniquely on the SAT, which is why I've chosen to cover them today. So we have our past tense, simply the event that happened in the past and is now completed. That's important. Hang on to that idea as we get into the next section of this presentation. So it's simple to form the past tense. You just add ed to most words or d to words that end in e. We do, of course, have irregular past tense verbs like went, flew, sang, drank. This is the only time on the SAT that I would say you can use the explanation, well, it just kind of felt wrong, because this is the practice of memorization of vocabulary. So if you find that you are not entirely certain what some of the past simple tense of some verbs are, go ahead and look up a list online. There are plenty of resources that literally just have lists of irregular verbs for you to get familiar with. But some of our regular past simple tense verbs would be liked, transformed, changed, and as you can see, we are adding d or ed as needed. The present tense indicates that something is happening now. For example, run, swim, eat, and is. Verbs ending with an ing ending are either past or present. So I am running for school council, or he was running too fast. As you can see, ing is used for both of those tenses, so use context clues to make sure you can determine which tense we are speaking in. And then finally, we have our future tense, which indicates that an event will happen in the near or far future. Form this tense simply by adding will to the present tense. I will go, I will eat, you will graduate. And now we have something slightly more complicated. We just covered our past simple tense. Now there's this other thing called past perfect. So like we just said, past simple is any action that was completed in the past. Remember I pointed that out? It's used when a specific time is mentioned or when something occurred only one time. For example, she found the kitten underneath a bale of hay in the back of the barn. So she found one time a kitten underneath a bale of hay. And then similarly, we have 2 separate verbs here. It snowed for several hours on Tuesday, but then the rain washed it away. So snowed and washed are following our normal rule of adding d or ed depending. Both of these we would add ed. And these are describing things that happen at specific times and only happened once. So what happens if we are referring to a past event in terms of a sequence? Well, then we would be using our past perfect. Past perfect describes an action in the past in relation to another past event, used when you want to clarify which of the two past actions happened first in the past. For example, I had already mopped when you spilled your coffee. I had mopped first before you spilled your coffee, but spilled is also past tense, so we know that all of these things have already happened. Dylan had visited Ireland twice before he eventually moved to Dublin. So anytime you're seeing multiple past tense verbs, look around for this word had, this helping verb. Oftentimes, if you see had and then an ed or d verb, you are dealing with the past perfect tense. All right, moving right along. Information organization. So there are many ways in which the SAT will require you to make decisions about information organization. One of these ways will be you will be asked either to keep or add, or delete or exclude a sentence. So the most important thing, remember, lots of times students will say, well, how am I supposed to know, how they would write this? Well, fortunately, there is a checklist. I personally am a checklist person. Hopefully this will help you as a memorizable tool. So there are clear guidelines for this. First, if it's relevant to the surrounding details, you can proceed to this list. If it's not surrounded by relevant details, then right off the bat, you know it's out of context. We don't need it here. We're not going to keep it. But if it does fit the context, does it also clarify something complex, give a specific example, or link two concepts together? If it checks the context box and any one of these boxes, then you're good to go, and that is a sentence that you are going to want to add or keep. You are always going to leave out or delete information that is, first, out of context, is random, unrelated, or confusing, repeats previously stated information. I would say that one's the biggest pitfall, or it doesn't match the data in a given figure. If you are watching this video while considering the ACT, know that this is an SAT specific tip. ACT writing passages do not include graphs that support the information, but SAT does. The second way that you are going to be asked to organize information, signified by numbered paragraphs. So certain sentences in paragraphs you are editing will be numbered. These sentences will be followed by questions asking you if and how they should be arranged in the paragraph at large. In order to answer correctly, you must read the entire paragraph first. Second, you have to identify how the paragraph is organized. It's easiest to identify the organizational pattern by leaving out the sentence in question. The three main organizational structures you will see are as follows. You can have information that is set up chronologically. First this happened, and then that happened. You can have an increase in detail, ordering sentences either from most general to most specific, the most common orientation, or most specific to most general, depending. Then finally, you'll have related concepts. So that's when the first portion of the paragraph focuses on topic A, the second portion of the paragraph focuses on topic B, and there is almost always a link between them. If the sentence in question pertains to both of these concepts, you have found your transitional phrase, and that is going to be sandwiched nicely between topic 1 and topic 2, or A and B. So like I said, the most important thing is first to identify how is this text working. And like I recommended, I would always exclude, when you read through the second time, I would exclude the sentence in question from the paragraph that you're reading, simply because it might be out of order and you might have to move it, and its current placement might trip you up and might make it a little bit harder to understand how the text as a whole is operating, and therefore where that sentence belongs. Okay, part 3. The final way that you will be asked to manipulate sentences on the SAT is by combining sentences. This is another one where students feel a little bit gypped, like everyone might have a different way of wanting to do this, but fortunately, again, there is a checklist, there is a formula to this, so stay calm. I promise there's a way around this one. Keep in mind, the overall standards for information organizations are in the eyes of the test makers, but fortunately, we know how they think. So if you follow these 3 simple steps to narrow down your answer, you will almost always be led to the most correct answer. First thing you want to do immediately eliminate all answer options containing a semicolon, as this piece of punctuation functions essentially like a period and therefore is not a means of combining, just separating in a different way. Semicolons look inviting. They look like just a clever, kind of chic way to reorganize your sentence, but it actually is functionally a period. So that defeats the purpose of combining sentences. It's just dividing in a different way. Eliminate immediately. Second, screen the remaining options for correct grammar and overall flow. So this is when we are remembering that SAT writers prioritize simple presentation of information, non-complicated punctuation, and then also what reads aloud well. I wouldn't recommend sitting in your SAT testing room and reading all of your ideas actually out loud, but sometimes if you read things out loud in your brain, it allows you to separate from the page for a moment, especially if you find yourself diagnosed with a reading-based learning disorder. It can help to hear the words in a different medium, even if it is just in your brain and not directly from the page. So that would be something I would recommend if you're struggling to figure out why it feels wrong. And then finally, you choose the answer option that is the most concise. No complicated punctuation, and what you can read out loud the most smoothly. Okay, so as I wrap up, here are some last minute tips that I wish someone would have kind of told me as I prepared for my SAT. This might feel overkill. However, like I said, the SAT is formulaic, fortunately for us. It is something that you can learn how to approach, and it is far less important to memorize content as it is to perfect your information presentation skills. So do yourself a favor and spend 10 minutes per day reviewing basic grammar concepts. If you find, wow, I really don't understand how prepositional phrases work, or I'm having a hard time understanding the different text structure organizations, do yourself a favor and just brush up on those every now and then. Secondly, keep in mind that you are being quizzed on your ability to process and recognize information, not on your ability to have memorized complex concepts. That comes into play especially in the ACT science section, which is weirdly enough one of my favorite sections to teach. Third to last here, relax. I promise that your biggest enemy on the exam is overthinking. You have the tools in your toolbox, you have the time, you are seeking out help, so that puts you, like I said, ahead of the game. And then finally, and going off of that, don't underestimate yourself. You've got this, you're prepared, and if you have questions, you know where to go. Which kind of leads me to this last bit here. If you or you're a student, if you are a parent watching and you want to get in touch, here is the link that you should follow. It's embracetutoring.com/tutors. Go ahead and look for Nadia Blair. You can find my full profile, which includes all of my credentials, areas of expertise, and you can request to work for me through there. So thank you again for watching this video. I really appreciate your time. I am looking forward to connecting with you soon. I hope that you have a pleasant and safe week.